All right, these are the week 9 lecture notes on John Greenleaf, Whittier, and Fanny Fern. I really admire these two writers a great deal. Very different, obviously, in their styles, but just a kind of a brief overview of their lives and their works and what they are known for. And of course, I would get the hiccups as soon as I start talking. So I will talk about John Greenleaf Whittier first. He was the son of two devout Quakers, so he was raised very heavily in the Quaker religion. If you don't know anything about Quakers, they have to me, a very interesting faith base. Basis of which inner light is like one of the concepts of Quakerism, or the Quaker religion. I don't know if that's called Quakerism. I need to look that up. I asked the Google. The Quaker religion, the Quaker faith. Inner light is the idea that there is a bit of God in every man, every person. God and his goodness and his light is present in every man. And then they also really heavily relied on the idea of a reverence for all souls, and bouncing off that idea of the inner light. If God is love and God is found in every man, then we should love every man regardless of their skin color, their ideology. That is what God would do. And so those are the basic tenets of the Quaker religion. He had little formal education. He grew up on a farm, on his family's farm, and so here's a guy that grew into great success as a writer with very little formal education, and which was not uncommon at the time, obviously, but it's just interesting to me. He was devoted to social causes and reform. He worked passionately for abolition newspapers and magazines. Very outspoken about slavery and the abolitionist movement and the laws that at the time that were in place for slaves, like this Fugitive Slave Act that was passed by Congress. And so we see a lot of that in his writing. He became the editor of the New England Weekly Review. He was a supporter of the National Republicans, ran unsuccessfully for Congress in 1832. He would go on to run again. He wrote essays and articles as well as poems, almost all of which were concerned with abolition and slavery. So I think that's kind of his niche. He founded the Anti-Slavery Liberty Party in 1840, ran for Congress again in 1842. He helped to found Atlantic Monthly magazine, which is still going strong today. They have a digital presence that's very strong. If you've ever read articles, or Google searched different topics, chances are there's been an article about it in Atlantic Monthly. Whittier's critics never really considered him to be a great poet, though they thought he was kind, they thought he was noble, and they thought that he gave unique expression to the ideas that they really valued. After the Civil War, he kind of switched directions with his work and began writing about religion, nature, and rural life. We didn't look at any of those texts. Snowbound, A Winter Idol is probably his most famous of those. He became the most popular of the fireside poets, a group of men who were the first group of American poets to rival the popularity of British poets. And they were notable for their scholarship, their political sensibilities. They're a little bit more Victorian than romantic in nature. They're very sentimental, and they have there's a lot of moralizing in their texts. And so those really all those things kind of really play a role in his writing. And we're going to look at two texts by John Greenleaf Whittier, which are both on slavery. The first one is Hunters of Men, and then the second one is a criticism It's called Ichabod, and it's a criticism of a popular senator at the time, who Whittier was really he was really fond of. He was fond of and had a lot of respect for him. And he Daniel Webster was the name of the senator, and he founded the Daniel Webster pushed for the Fugitive Slave Bill, which basically said that people, runaway slaves, could be caught even in free states and returned back to their slave owners, even the ones that were freed once they crossed into those free states. And um and this revelation, just stunned Whittier. He was this man that he'd held so much respect for, that now had kind of debased himself by championing this movement that basically said that slaves should be hunted down like animals and returned back into slavery for their to their masters. And so those are going to play a role in those two poems that you're going to read from John Greenleaf Whittier. This is one of my favorites. Sarah Payson Willis. She was more commonly known as Fanny Fern. Huge champion of women's rights. Mid 19th century. So basically, started out, spent most of her childhood in Boston. Her father was a newspaper editor and a deacon of the church. Her older brother, Nathaniel Parker Willis, he was a popular writer and an editor. By the time she started seminary school, which was kind of I guess a college ish kind of for women, the Hartford Female Seminary in Hartford, Massachusetts. She showed great promise, and she was really renowned for her impressive literary talents. And after seminary, she comes back home and she begins to write for her father's one of her father's publications, which was a children's periodical. It's called the Youth's Companion. She married Charles Harrington Eldridge, who was a banker, in 1837. They had 3 children together, and then several years, well, actually, just a couple of years, 3 years time. She experienced great loss. In 1844, her youngest sister died during childbirth. Her mother died a few months later. 1845, her oldest daughter died of meningitis. And a year later, her husband died of typhoid fever. And so, in a short period of time, she lost 4 family members, including her husband, her mother, and her daughter. And so that had a great impact on Sarah Willis. So here she was, a widowed mother, 2 children, little financial support from her in-laws and from her own family. And so she remarried because that's what women did at the time. Women didn't have a lot of rights, and they didn't have, the diverse sources of income that men, and choices and options that men had. And so she remarried this guy, Samuel P. Farrington. He was a merchant. He was a widower. And so this guy was a piece of work. He was unkind. He was extremely jealous. He accused her of cheating all the time. He tried to turn her own children against her. And so 2 years of this hell that she was living in, she picked up her 2 children. She left Farrington. She moved to a Boston hotel, which at the time it caused a huge scandal because, this was just not the way that proper women behaved. And it resulted in alienation and isolation from her own family, from her very conservative family. And so his issues didn't stop there. He started spreading all these vicious rumors about it, which called her integrity into question, and eventually filed for divorce, which was granted on September the 7th, 1853. Now, again, this is a time period where something like divorce was a insurmountable scandal for a woman. Divorces just were not commonplace. Now they're a dime a dozen. You don't like your marriage, you can get out of it. People go into marriage, thinking about that. But this wasn't the case in this mid 19th century. So here she was, a single mom, trying to just live her life and provide for her two young girls, and in a life that was her own, and not overshadowed by, a jealous crazy guy. So to provide for herself, she started writing under the pen name Fanny Fern, and she began writing regular newspaper columns for the True Flag and the Olive Branch, which were two Boston publications. And she barely earned enough to keep them afloat, honestly. But despite that, her popularity grew. At the time, there were lack of strict copyright restrictions, and so her columns were frequently reprinted. And because of that, she soon developed a following throughout the Northeast, because her works were being reprinted all over the Northeast. In 1846, her brother Nathaniel started the Home Journal, which is now known as Town and Country magazine, very popular today. But by the 1850s, it had become pretty successful. And the editor was a guy named James Parton, and he loved Fern's work so much that he decided to reprint several pieces. But once her brother found out about it, he was furious. He found out that it was written by her, with all of her scandal from, her marriage. He forbade Parton to publish any additional writings, and as a result, Parton resigned from his job. Like, he walked away from it because he believed so strongly in Fanny Fern's work. J.C. Derby was a publisher from Auburn, New York, and he approached Fern about the possibility of publishing some of her columns. She agreed, and they settled on something that was kind of unique at the time. Royalty payments were usually done in a lump sum. So if you wrote something, royalty, if it was reprinted, you would get one lump sum at the beginning, and that was, or at the end, or after a certain period of time, and that was all the money you got on it. But she settled on royalty payments of 10 cents per copy, which really paid off, because within a year, her text, Fern Leaves from Fanny's Portfolio, had sold nearly 100,000 copies. So here she is. She moves to New York. She begins writing for the Musical World and Times, which was edited by her older brother, Richard Willis, which he was not like Nathaniel. He was a champion of Fern's work, and he encouraged her, and he published her work without hesitation. And so her popularity grew, and she was finally able to provide comfortably for her family and devote herself fully to her writing. So she goes on. Next several years, columns, novels, children's books. She becomes known for her advocacy of women's rights and independence, and becomes a proponent of educational reform for children. She also attacked social or gender bias and the discrimination of women. And I talk about that more in the text notes for the three texts that you're going to read. In 1856, she married James Parton, who was the former Home Journal editor who had resigned, who was a really big proponent of her work. And he was already, in addition to being an editor, he was already an established author. And so he was a hugely supportive husband. They had a very happy marriage. Through their literary connections, they ran in the same circles as respected writers of the time. William Cullen Bryant, which we've already read some stuff from. Bret Harte, who wrote a lot about a lot of Western, kind of like the creator of the Western novel. And Horace Greeley, as well as more bohemian crowd, including Walt Whitman, who became a fairly successful poet in his own right. So Fern battled cancer for the last 6 years of her life, finally succumbing on October the 10th, 1872. And then only 2 words adorn her gravestone: Fanny Fern. The headstone is a simple, plain cross, and it has ferns creeping around its base. And it serves as a metaphor, really, for the woman who became to be known, even by those closest to her, by the name that she fashioned for herself, the life that she made for herself, her reinvention of herself. A woman raised in a deeply religious and highly traditional household, who climbed to the top of her profession and went on to become one of the most well-known and outspoken writers of her day. So we're going to take a look at these texts by John Greenleaf Whittier and Fannie Fern, and I know that you're going to enjoy them because I have a lot of respect for these authors, and these texts are great.